The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast and another installment of Oak's Hour. My name is Oak, and I'm your host. Dedicated listeners will know that these Oak's Hour episodes are monologues that work to synthesize and synergize the themes from the last several episodes. As such, I will be working with the themes from my conversations with Laura Brennan-Ballet, Tay Ari, and Renee Bryant. The questions I will be examining in today's episode are as follows. 1. What if the path to empowerment begins not with force, but with feeling? 2. What is the difference between choosing your energy and avoiding your emotions? 3. In what ways have we exiled play from our lives, and how might we welcome it back home? 4. How do accountability and surrender coexist in creative life? And finally, 5, what becomes possible when we stop trying to fix ourselves and start listening? With our journey laid out before us, let's dive into question number 1. What if the path to empowerment begins not with force, but with feeling? What is power? What is force? And what is feeling? In Dr. David Hawkins' work, Power versus Force, he lays out a clear and succinct differentiation, which can be summarized thusly. Force moves against, power simply moves. Force elicits counterforce, and thus resistance. Power does no such thing. I like to think of power more as an emanation rather than a push. Power is aligned with truth, integrity, and higher awareness. It does not oppose, it attracts. Force, on the other hand, is willful, effortful, and reactive. It seeks to control. Now, feeling is perception, or rather, it's perceiving of a specific quality of sensation. With feeling, we have that which is felt and that which feels. This distinction is relevant because the role of consciousness is fundamental in this process. The act of feeling can be understood as focus on and awareness of the place and space wherein feelings arrive, as well as the feelings themselves. So, force opposes and pushes, power attracts, enlivens, and expands, and feeling is a perceptual doing that takes sensation and emotion as its focus. Regarding our question then, if to grow in power or become empowered is our goal, then we have two potential options, force or feeling. And by applying our definitions to this end, we might come to a point of clarity. The path of force is the path of opposition, and in our case, the opposition in question would be disempowerment. It's here where we get a meaningful clue into why this may not be the most effective option. Force is limited. One can only struggle for so long before exhaustion sets in. In this limitation, then, force reveals itself to be incompatible with power and thus empowerment. Does feeling share such incompatibilities and incongruence? Being that feeling is a perceptive act, one whose essence is conscious, of consciousness, then we must ask a rather profound question. Is consciousness finite or infinite? The contents of consciousness are infinite in variety and finite in duration, but consciousness itself, if we accept Hawkins' understanding alongside the proclamations of the great sages of all times, is itself limitless. Feeling, then, contains or is related to this limitlessness of consciousness in some meaningful way. Emotions and sensations are contents of consciousness and are thus limited in their duration, yet they make up only half of the act of feeling. Remember, there is what is felt and that which feels. In this sense, that which feels, conscious awareness or perception, is more akin to power than it is to force. To feel is to be active and intentional with one's focus in the present now. It is to open to what is, perceptually, sensitively, and to be formed and informed thereby. The now is the epicenter of truth, and even if the content of our feeling experience is temporary or limited, by choosing to feel, we bridge the infinitude of consciousness with the finitude of sensation. This brings power into the present by altogether avoiding the pitfall of resistance by relying on awareness rather than will. By choosing to be conscious, whether of our sensations, emotions, or even our thoughts, we are aligning with the underlying true nature of reality. To choose to feel without resistance is an act of power, one whose repetition will only further serve to expand consciousness and, dare I say, vitalize the body. But we don't always choose to feel our emotions, do we? And this brings us to our next question. What is the difference between choosing your energy and avoiding your emotions? From our latest explanation, avoiding your emotions is the opposite of choosing to feel and perceive them. This can be via direct ignoring, covering up, denying, or distracting. Anything that's done to ensure that what could be perceived clearly isn't. This is markedly different from choosing your energy, even though avoiding your emotions is also a choice. But what exactly does a vague statement like choosing your energy really mean? In a single word, orientation. If we conceptualize our energy as the sum quality of our conscious experience, then choosing our energy means playing an intentional role in determining the quality of that experience. The core choice each of us make whenever life happens to or through us is one of orientation. When speaking of orientation, I'm denoting the simplest of choice points, either yes or no. Allow me to offer an example. Suppose that you are in a committed, long-term monogamous relationship. Your beloved is at home and you're out running errands. On your journey, you encounter a particularly attractive individual, someone whose image, personality, voice, and aura are absolutely captivating. Encountering this human stimulates a wave of thoughts, sensations, emotions, and desires within you. If we look at this through the lens of yes and no choice point orientation, then you can either orient yes or no to the facts of your current experience. Do note, dear listener, that orienting yes to your experience is distinct from orienting yes to the person or even engaging with them in any way. We're speaking about orientation towards one's own inner experience only. What happens if you orient no? You can deny that you're feeling as you are, effectively lying. You could choose to shame yourself for what was out of your control and then spiral into secrecy and denial. All in all, these choices draw yourself out of alignment with truth and with reality. If you orient yes towards your experience, then you choose to witness, to perceive all that is arising. You neither condemn nor condone, promote nor dismiss any aspect of what arises in you. Your yes constitutes your openness to reality, and therein offers you an opportunity to come to know something real. And this is inherently valuable. This orientation is essentially non-propositional. There's no set of rules or ideas to follow or abide by. Rather, it's the opportunity to be conscious and perceptually open to what is, or not. By choosing to be open and equanimous, this is non-judgmental, we effectively neutralize any opportunity for negative energetic outcomes to occur. Negativity is bred by resistance and by judgment. And without these, at worst, we're only neutral. To take it one step further, then, once you've perceived whatever has arisen as equanimously and non-judgmentally as you can, then you can choose to author thoughts that generate a positive, energetic state. Let me put it another way. Once you have neutralized, you can aim to leverage all that arises to the end of promoting well-being, your own and others. Once we begin to grow our capacity to remain neutral, the happenings of our lives become less gravely serious and, in many cases, can take on a playful quality. And this brings us perfectly to our next question. In what ways have we exiled this kind of play from our lives, and how might we welcome it home? Well, it might be easiest to identify from where play has been exiled in our lives by acknowledging the few places where it still remains. Sports, both professional and recreational, offer us a container for our innate need for play. Although far more people watch sports than do play them, this fact exemplifies the externalization of our impulse to play onto surrogates. It might be interesting to note as well that these surrogates are often also elevated to hero status. Another example would be acting and comedy. These are both forms of play that, like sports, have more spectators than participants. Both acting and comedy embody play in different ways. The former allows us to play pretend, suspending our ordinary life story for one that is far more compelling. The latter allows us to play and explore beyond the confines of social acceptability. It grants us permission to say, if we're the comedian, and acknowledge, as the audience, the so-called quiet part out loud. Of course, we also play games, card games, board games, video games. These all offer a wide range of stimulus, from the developmentally and socially supportive to the addictive and degenerative. Let's acknowledge just how strong our play drive really is, such that in our undernourished and playless environments of the corporate West, many escape to the point of addiction into play-based worlds of fantasy, all as an attempt to soothe their discomfort. Lastly, we also play music, although for many they do a great deal more practice and performance than they do play. All other major areas of life outside the aforementioned are likely to be low or no play zones. I believe by identifying what each from this aforementioned list has in common, that we'll be able to better derive a way to welcome play back home. So, as far as comedy, acting, and music are concerned, and to a lesser extent sports, we are speaking to a present moment creative process. Improv comedy, crowd work, and writing all involve drawing something new into the world through the present moment. Jamming, songwriting, or soloing are all much the same process, with simply a different medium. To act is to bring forward sentiments and temperaments from your own depth and wed them with a script, effectively birthing life into the written word. When the entirety of the psyche is engaged in just such a process, it's often described as a flow state, and this is a term we hear used frequently at the highest echelons of sports performance as well. But what does this all tell us, really? Well, it's clear that there's a few essential pieces to activating our playful being. I've come up with 5 here. Presence, immersion, the suspending of the ordinary, novelty, and a dedicated container and/or sense of safety. With these 5 elements, we have the ingredients for play, but they're not enough on their own. It is we who play, and thus we must put some of ourselves back into the mix if we are to succeed in bringing play back from exile. Think back to when we spoke about orientation. We looked at the simplest sort, this yes or no choice point to life. We can now imagine another sort of orientation pairing: serious or playful. Am I going to maintain my commitment to the regular, the ordered, structured, and the known? Or am I willing to choose to walk the edge of the unknown, the absurd, the silly, and the new? When we were children, we had to learn to take a serious orientation because our natural state was that of play. The naturalness of play has not left us. Good news. It's waiting for each of us to remember that play is a necessary and legitimate choice, and it's one that generates creativity as well as well-being and joy. Play does so and is so powerful because we ourselves are creative beings. We are life, and life is creative. The creative process, as it's sometimes called, is inevitable. It's unavoidable. We as humans must create as it is what we are. Why then, if this is true, are so many people now living only as consumers instead of creators? Perhaps it's because we have fallen out of balance with ourselves. And this leads me into our penultimate question. How do accountability and surrender exist in such a necessary creative life? In addressing this question, I am immediately reminded of the Serenity Prayer, which, in short, goes something like this. May I be granted the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I believe this applies to our inquiry about balancing accountability and surrender in creative life. When we're speaking about accountability, we're really talking about the act and practice of acknowledging ownership of our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and to a large extent, their consequences. Personal accountability is one mark of a matured psyche. However, this idea of ownership or claiming or what's mine can easily go way too far and tip the scales against creative and playful living. If we take responsibility and accountability for things that are not within our domain, these are things that we have no real right to or responsibility for, then we have effectively selected for ourselves extraneous mental and emotional burdens that encumber the open and reciprocal communication with the present that, in part, constitutes the creative process. Put simply, we cannot make anything of meaning or value if our hands are full of things that we're not meant to carry. Another relevant part of accountability is that it is an enacted and an embodied quality of human expression. It involves a doing. Such doing is antithetical to surrender, which at its core is an ending or a cessation. This cessation or relinquishing has been mirrored twofold in our exploration thus far. I wonder if you've already been able to pick out where. At first, it is in relationship to power and force. To surrender force brings us closer to empowerment and thus closer to power. And secondly, we find it inside the Serenity Prayer, the courage to accept or stop resisting the things that one cannot change. These same aspects of surrender, relinquishing, and acceptance are essential. They're absolutely essential parts within the creative and play process. We cannot force creativity as much as we cannot force genuine play. These are spontaneous and emergent, two aspects that only appear when a certain threshold of surrender and acceptance is met. It might already be clear to you that if one strays beyond the bounds of genuine accountability and burdens their mind and actions with responsibilities or worries that are not rightfully theirs, that the environment for play and creativity will all but disappear. The balancing of accountability and surrender, then, is one resting on wise discernment for the scope of our responsibilities as well as their effect. I believe that naturally, the scope of our responsibilities actually leaves enough room for play and for creativity. But we don't live naturally, however, and thus the impetus to make time for play and creativity grows ever stronger by the day. If we should hope to cultivate such wise discernment, then it would serve us well to learn to listen with deep curiosity to ourselves and our lives. And this then brings us to the final question of today's episode. What happens when we stop trying to fix ourselves and start listening? Being that we have already identified the potency and necessity of listening and intentional inner perception more broadly, it will serve us better now to look at why we might avoid the fixing approach at all. Where I grew up, folks around me used to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And maybe you've heard this or another similar saying in your own life. And despite the abysmal grammar, the wisdom in this saying remains untarnished. Additionally, or perhaps subsequently, we must have a surefire way of knowing what exactly is broken before attempting any repairs. So, what happens when we apply this idea to fixing ourselves then? Well, applying this idea to fixing ourselves takes on a new and slightly different, albeit interesting, trajectory. What might be fixed? Ourself? Is this our body, our attitudes, our habits, or our psyche? You might already be saying, yes, Oak, all of those. To which I would reply, these answers are far too varied and unspecific to really be of much use. This is because the most apt technicians are diagnosticians. They hone in on the precise area of malfunction in order to apply the proper repair or remedy effectively. We, as the humans we are amateur diagnosticians at best, especially when it comes to our own humanness. And thus, we might believe there's a problem due to the presence of our own suffering or discontentment. Maybe we're right. We might look at our life and think, this really isn't how it should be. And that's fine. But this doesn't necessarily mean that anything is broken, per se. It surely definitely doesn't mean that what is broken is you, whatever you actually are. I'm not encouraging inaction here or denying anyone's suffering. Rather, I'm proposing that our energy would better be applied by keeping two ideas in mind. The first, the psyche and soul are not like the material body and are less likely to break in the ways we might associate with bones, skin, or nails. Theirs is the domain of efficiency. How well do they meet any given need? Low efficiency or effectiveness is often misconstrued as brokenness. And the second point is that the more precisely that one knows the dysfunction, the more efficient and effective the remedy can be. Okay. So with these ideas in mind, then, we can say that when we stop trying to fix ourselves, we free up energy and attention that can be put to better use. It would be put to better use by identifying the needs that are driving the behaviors that are contributing to our sense of dissatisfaction and suffering. By pivoting away from the view of broken self, then, into an attitude of curiosity and promoting the effective and healthy meeting of our needs, we actually shift away from being an adversary to ourselves to being more of a friend. We no longer hold a diminutive or lowly view of ourselves, but rather we switch teams back onto our own side and begin working to better our habits, better meet our needs, and to improve the quality of our own life. If someone, maybe a coworker or stranger, repeatedly told you that you were broken and incomplete, we might call that bullying or mistreatment. We could also agree that their intentions and actions are not really aligned with your greatest expression of well-being at all. So then, why on earth would any of us think that bullying ourselves with poor self-image and critical self-talk would ever be an effective way to self-improvement? Does this critical eye identify areas of growth? Sure, sometimes. But it does not equip us with the will and support that we need to make the relevant adjustments for the right reasons. So what happens when you stop trying to fix yourself and start listening? Well, you end up back on your own side, allied with your own well-being and more effective at eliciting the changes that you most want to see in your life. To conclude then, we've explored the potency of perception, feeling, and listening on the path to empowerment. We identified the limits of force and the necessity of inner awareness regarding personal transformation. We've plodded through play and creativity, exploring the role of surrender and accountability as contributors to the generative process. And we explored how a reframe from brokenness to effectiveness can rid us of oppositional and negative self-views and help get us back on track to living in alignment with our highest well-being now and into the future. I thank you deeply for spending your time with me today. Be well. And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have two invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.